This is an examination of the hidden human condition.
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast
with Tony Bruschi.
We are talking with psychotherapist and author Siobhan Scott today, discussing some of the latest in the case against Bryan Kohberger, some observations that have been thrown out there in the last handful of days, and the psychological impact that it has. Obviously, people are looking at this from different perspectives depending on who they are with this, whether it's just somebody on the sidelines watching or you're a family member or what have you. They're looking at it costing $1 million more if Kohberger were to be put to death if found guilty versus life in prison. Can you speak to that and the psychological effects of that? Is this something that makes a bit of difference in the minds of those who lost someone versus the minds of those who are on the outside looking in and assuming that he's guilty as being an evil person who deserves something like this if convicted?
Yeah, a lot of people are very invested in the death penalty. I mean, people have strong feelings, both pro and con. But I have heard from some of the family members, or I've heard interviews from them. Some of them are very invested in the death penalty for him, and they're not going to be satisfied with anything less than that, should he be convicted, of course. Yeah. And then some of the other parents are saying, that they think life in prison would be more of a punishment than death, perhaps. So there are all different points of view, different ways of looking at it. And I doubt that the cost makes a big difference to people who have an emotional investment on either side.
Of course. It's one of those things where people talk about this, and I hear it brought up quite often when people think it's the opposite. They think, well, if we put them to death, then there's not going to be this cost to the state and all, keeping them alive in prison. There's the upkeep of a prisoner, basically.
Sure.
Not the case, though. A lot of what does this change opinion, I wonder, because that's usually one of the bigger arguments that's made, other than the person that's being put to death is usually a horrible human being. It's more so also, well, look how much money this saves us as a taxpayer. But that's not true.
No, it's not true. We're not in Saudi Arabia, or a country where you just get taken out immediately after you steal the loaf of bread and get your head cut off or something. There's a whole process that goes on here, and it is incredibly expensive. But for people who feel like this is the only way that they're going to have any peace, which that's debatable if that's going to really make them feel any better or not. But people get very caught up in the emotional need to see this happen. So I doubt that they care.
Kohberger's defense team is now having access to the training records of 3 of the officers involved in the investigation of the murder of the University of Idaho students. Let's talk about that for a moment. And I get they have the right to take a look at these sort of things. And obviously, if there's something questionable there, it should be brought up. But a lot of the training took place well before the trial, but well before the crime was ever committed, allegedly by Kohberger. Is this something where they're really trying to poke holes into anything they can? Are they trying to intimidate the department in any way, shape, or form by really saying, look, we got a microscope on every single thing that you did, so you better watch out? Is that part of the tactic here?
Well, I think they're making the point that they are looking very closely, and they're going to be doing everything they possibly can to try to save him here. And I get it. That makes sense. But yeah, it's frustrating at the same time when you feel like, okay, how much energy are we putting into something that is probably not going to be, there's not going to be something that gets him out of this here. Mm-hmm. But that sure looks like what they're trying to do.
The home is being set to be razed, is I guess what I could say. There's not a firm date on it, and it's been kind of going in limbo for quite a while. University says they have all the rights to do it. They said they have everybody who needs to legally sign off on it, has signed off on it, but it sits right now, and there's been a lot of objections of should this thing exist during the trial? Should they want to take the jurors there? With something like this, in a case like this, and historically speaking, do you feel that having something like this benefits a trial? And what I mean by that is, benefiting it in a fair and unbiased way for either side, because either or could use it for whatever they want, technically, to have it still be there. Should this thing still be standing, or does it make more sense for the community just to take this thing out?
Yeah, I see both sides. I would imagine that it could give jurors some degree of clarity to visit the scene. And in that way, it could benefit either the defense or the prosecution, depending on what they see and what they observe and experience. So I can see a reason for leaving it for a time. But on the other hand, it is a creepy looking house at this point. It's all boarded up, and it is a continual reminder right there next to student housing. Everybody has to look at it all the time. And it is sort of like looking at this haunted house that's just morbid and a lot of negative associations for people. So I can also see how it would be a big relief to just have it gone.
You're locked into the Hidden Killers podcast.
Want more? Start binging on all of our true crime podcasts right now through Apple Podcasts and get an ad-free experience when you sign up to be a True Crime Today Premium Plus member exclusively on Apple Podcasts.
More of the Hidden Killers podcast dropping soon.
Press subscribe now.